On August 22nd, it was announced that the role of Nefertari Cobra in Netflix's live-action adaptation of One Piece would be played by Sendhil Ramamurthy, an American actor whose parents immigrated from India before his birth. The very next day, it was announced that Nefertari Vivre would be played by Charithra Chandran, an English actress whose parents are Indian Tamil immigrants. Pretty much immediately, this started discourse online, with many One Piece fans calling out the fact that these two characters have traditionally been interpreted as Egyptian Arabs and not Indians, and that it felt kind of targeted to take the two most prominent Arab roles and give them to Indian actors, non-Arabs. Of course, as with any accusation of discrimination by a large company, a bunch of weirdos online made it their mission to defend the company and actually prove that no discrimination was happening at all. Many of these people tried to claim that the kingdom of Alabasta, where Vivre and Cobra are from, was not actually meant to be interpreted as an Arab nation at all, let alone Egypt. And some went as far as to say that actually, it was based on India, you guys. And since Alabasta is apparently supposed to be India, that means that the casting wasn't a race swap. It wasn't a case of Arabs not getting Arab roles. It was actually just a case of two Indian actors getting cast for Indian roles. No discrimination at all, nothing to see here. If you can't tell already from my tone, I think that these people are annoying and pathetic. But just because someone is dirty and stinky and doesn't take baths, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. So, let's get into it. Let's look at the evidence and figure out what is going on here. Now, fair warning, this is going to get a little bit inside baseball. But if you stick around until the end, we're going to circle back to that question of discrimination. And the video is going to take a turn that you should be able to predict, but that you probably won't. Alabasta is not India. Let's start with that. The only source for the claim that the Kingdom of Alabasta is based on India is Rurubu One Piece, a travel guidebook published in 2021 as a collaboration between One Piece's publisher, Shueisha, and the travel information magazine Rurubu. According to this book, the capital city of Alubarna is based on the Indian city of Jodhpur, and the palace in Alubarna is based on Marangar and the Taj Mahal. While other places in Alabasta are acknowledged as having Egyptian roots, these locations are supposed to represent clear Indian influence for the kingdom. Well, if an officially released book is making these claims, why shouldn't we believe them? The first major problem with using this book as a source has to do with the fact that its authors did not consult with Eiichiro Oda, the creator of One Piece, at all. Instead, some of the writers and editors for this travel information magazine simply looked through the manga and attempted to find real-world locations that reminded them of the fictional ones they saw. To quote from an ad for the book posted to fashionpress.net, Rurubu One Piece is the first guidebook to the locations that inspired One Piece, which was thoroughly researched and covered by the editorial staff of Rurubu from all over the world. It features real-life locations from around the world that are similar to the locations in the story, along with scenes from the original work. They did not ask Oda what inspired him to create these locations. They simply found real locations that they felt were similar to ones found in the manga. That might be an interesting exercise, but it doesn't prove inspiration. The similarities they found are also extremely dubious. For example, one of the things they use to claim Alabasta is inspired by India is the presence of onion dome buildings. While onion dome buildings are certainly a feature of Indian architecture, like in the previously mentioned Taj Mahal, they're also found all over the Arab world. Hell, there are onion dome buildings in Europe and Russia. Should we claim Alabasta was based partially on Russia? Is the palace in Alubarna based on this Russian church? The connection simply isn't as strong as they make it seem. Further, being a travel magazine, there is an incentive for the Rurubu staff to try to include as many locations in their book as possible. If Alabasta is just Egypt, that's nice and all, but it isn't as good as if Alabasta is Egypt and also India and also Mali. That's right, they also claim that parts of Alabasta, specifically the town of Yuba, are based on the country of Mali. Dawn Island, where Luffy was raised, is apparently based on England, the Netherlands, Spain, and the Philippines, depending on where you are. Drum Island, the snow-covered island where the Straw Hats meet Chopper, is supposed to be based on locations in Italy, Germany, and the United States. Interestingly, none of the specific locations mentioned in the book, which were just shown on screen, are known to be snowy. As an aside, Chopper is a reindeer, which are native to Canada, and Oda has said Chopper would be Canadian if the story took place in the real world. Large sections of Canada are famously covered in snow, but Rurubu does not include a single location in Canada in their rundown of Drum Island. Is there really just nothing worth seeing in Canada? Okay, alright, yeah, there's nothing worth seeing in Canada, but that's not the point, I digress. The point is, with every location they explore, they try their best, reach as hard as they can, to make it fit into as many real-world travel destinations as possible. The incentives of being a travel company push them to do that. The fact that Rurubu is a travel magazine also means that it is full of advertisements, and there are no doubt some paid advertisements included in their One Piece material. The book doesn't just point its readers to locations similar to the ones found in One Piece. It provides advice on how to tour those places, what to eat while you're there, and so on. For example, the Fashion Net ad mentions that the book recommends a gondola boat tour through Venice based on the Yagara service in Water 7. It claims that the Pumpkin Cafe in Skypiea, seen only a single time and partially obscured on the cover of Chapter 647, is based on the El Mesón restaurant chain. Is there any possible explanation for this besides advertisement? Shonen anime fans have this weird love for data books that I've just never understood, but the fact that people are citing this one in particular makes me feel like I'm going fucking insane. It would be like if people were citing Expedia or Travelocity. This book wasn't written by Oda, it wasn't overseen by Oda, it wasn't written or overseen by his editors. It is basically just a piece of fluff cooked up by Shueisha's marketing division. It's about as canon as those One Piece cup noodle ads. There is no reason to take it seriously. And since this is the only source for the supposed Indian influence in Alabasta, there is also no reason to take that claim seriously. There is just no good evidence for the claim that Alabasta was based on India. But do you know what there's a lot of evidence for? Alabasta is based on Egypt. It's just true. The evidence that Alabasta is based on Egypt is overwhelming. First, allow me to play the Rurubu game myself and highlight certain landmarks that point to the Egyptian inspiration for the setting. The Sandora River is a large body of water that runs north to south through the kingdom of Alabasta, much like the Nile in Egypt. While the Sandora eventually meets with the larger sea of the Grand Line, the Nile meets with the Mediterranean Sea. According to Vivre, long ago, the Sandora River nourished the land surrounding it, providing the agricultural fertility that allowed a city along its coastline, like Erumalu, to earn the nickname the Green City. But in recent years, it's lost much of its force, due to the river being encroached on by the sea, which seems to have slowly risen until it overwhelmed parts of the river. Similarly, the Nile has historically been the source of incredible fertility for the lands that surround it. Entire civilizations were built on top of that fertile soil. In recent years, however, the Nile has lost much of that power. One of the biggest reasons for this is that sea levels have risen. As of 2021, about 15% of Egypt's most fertile farmland has already been damaged by sea level rise and saltwater intrusion, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. The Sandora and the Nile are not only similar geographically, but they share a similar history and face similar ecological problems. Now, that's a little bit more specific than an onion dome, isn't it? Crocodile's hideout, rain base, is clearly modeled after a pyramid, and while pyramids are not exclusive to Egypt, they are certainly most closely associated with it. The Tomb of the Kings is a mortuary temple that contains the remains of the past kings of Alabasta, and its pillars and animal statues closely resemble the pillars and animal statues found at sites like the Temple of Hatshepsut, a mortuary temple in Egypt. The Tomb of the Kings also features artwork on its walls that closely resembles the hieroglyphs found on the walls in Egyptian tombs. Even the name, the Tomb of the Kings, seems to evoke the Valley of the Kings, a burial site in Egypt that gained great notoriety after the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, King Tut, in 1922. Towns like Yuba are dotted with dovecotes, a building style with small windows used to attract birds, specifically pigeons, and allow them to nest inside. These structures, especially the style in which they are built, are peculiar to Egypt. and they fill rural communities in Alabasta just as they appeared in rural communities there. The local wildlife is also pretty specific to Egypt. While each animal is exaggerated and caricatured in its One Piece incarnation, they are still recognizable as the kinds of animals you would find there. Alabasta has its Kung Fu dugong, while Egypt has its non-Kung Fu dugong. Eyelash the camel, with his single, low hump resembling an arched back, is closest in resemblance to the Camelus dromedarius, a species of camel also known as the Arabian camel, which, as you might have guessed, can be found all throughout the Arab world. The Bananawani are crocodiles, and I genuinely can't think of a country more associated with crocodiles than Egypt. The Nile crocodiles in particular are iconic. Crocodile being the name of the villain of the arc is also certainly not a coincidence. Just like it isn't a coincidence that the two head guards for the royal family of Alabasta are Pel the falcon and Chaka the jackal. Both of these animals were deeply associated with pharaonic power and fate in ancient Egypt, most notably through the gods Horus and Anubis. Likewise, the cobra was a symbol of the sovereignty of the pharaoh, and Egyptian pharaohs were frequently depicted with cobras situated atop their heads. It makes all too much sense then that the king of Alabasta is literally named Cobra. There are also cultural features of Alabastan society that draw obvious comparisons to Egypt. As mentioned before, they use hieroglyphics as a writing system and a means of artistic expression. It's also worth noting that Alabasta is the first place where we encounter the poneglyphs, a system of writing clearly meant to evoke hieroglyphics, and which represent a dead language which can now only be read by trained archaeologists. In the banquet at the end of the arc, the crew eat something called konafa, a real dish that is popular in the Middle East and originated in Egypt. I generally try to avoid using the Vivre cards as sources, for reasons not worth going into here, but even in those, it is stated that Vivi's favorite food is mulukaya, a soup made of jute leaves that originated in ancient Egypt. And while we're on the topic of Vivi, what may be the most definitive evidence that Alabasta is based on Egypt, and particularly ancient Egypt, is that the royal family name of the kingdom is Nefertari, which is the actual name of real-life Egyptian queen Nefertari Meretmut, and means the most beautiful one, or beautiful companion. I say that may be the most definitive evidence because the thing that is actually the most definitive evidence is that Oda literally said he based Alabasta on ancient Egypt. He just literally said that.
Oda-sensei, please hear me out. I was standing in a bookstore reading when I thought of something. Does Vivi have any connection to ancient Egypt? Her full name is Nefertari Vivi, and her father was Nefertari Cobra. In ancient Egypt, Nefertari had the meaning of most beautiful one, or most exalted one, and many queens and princesses had those hieroglyphics on their portraits. Furthermore, Alabasta seems to be a desert nation, and her father's name is Cobra. I'd like to know if I'm right. If so, please acknowledge me as Know-It-All Himeko's rival, Mai.
I see. That's what Nefertari means, huh? How nice. Actually, I did model Alabasta after ancient Egypt, and I flipped through a book on Egypt and picked words that sounded interesting. It seems I managed to pick a nice name. Talking to myself. Alright, I acknowledge it. You rival Know-It-All Himeko.
So what gives? Alright, so if there isn't any evidence at all that would convince a reasonable person that Alabasta was based on India, and there is undeniable proof, both in the manga and outside of it, that it was inspired by Egypt, why are we even having this conversation? Why didn't they cast 2 Egyptian actors? Or at least 2 Arab actors? I mean, shit, why didn't they cast 1 Arab actor? Are we supposed to believe that this was genuinely just a question of merit, and they simply couldn't find a single Arab actor good enough to play either the role of Cobra or Vivi? And let me clarify the problem here, because I know certain people are going to try to misconstrue this. I am totally in favor of colorblind casting. If they would have cast Luffy as a black man and Zoro as an Australian, I would not really have given much of a shit. It's acting. It's playing pretend. Personally, in my ideal world, any actor could play any part, regardless of gender, sexuality, race, or any of the other nonsensical ways we divide ourselves. The problem is that this does not appear to be a case of colorblind casting. It seems to be a case of deliberately trying to cut a certain population out of the production. They didn't do this to any other ethnicity. They took the only two prominent roles for Arabs in the series and they gave them both to Indians. That doesn't feel like colorblind casting. That feels like discrimination. And it's not just discrimination in representation. It's real, actual employment discrimination. If Oda doesn't include Arabs in his story, that might be unfortunate, but it isn't taking money out of anyone's pockets. If a film production chooses not to hire qualified Arab actors to play Arab parts, that actively hurts those actors economically. It stunts their careers. Not being let into the art is one thing. Not being let into a workplace is another. And in this case, they were already in the art, and now have been taken out of it and barred from the workplace. Now, for legal reasons, of course, I have to say that I don't actually know if this is a real case of discrimination. It's entirely possible that they tried really super hard, you guys, to cast the best people for the job, and it just so happened that both Arab roles had to go to Indians. That's totally possible, I'll admit it. But personally, I don't find that very likely, especially because this isn't the first production to pull something like this. In Disney's original Aladdin, a film set in a fictional Arab country with a cast full of Arab characters, the voice acting cast looked like this. When they adapted that cartoon into a live-action film, Disney initially tried to cast several Indian actors before public backlash led to them casting Egyptian actor Mina Massoud in the title role. But the role of Princess Jasmine still went to English Indian actress Naomi Scott. In the show Community, the character Abed Nadir, who is Palestinian, was played by Polish Indian actor Danny Pudi. In the show Lost, Iraqi character Syed Jarrah was played by Indian actor Naveen Andrews. The list goes on. What could this be other than a pattern of discrimination? Whenever a film or TV show wants to have an Arab character, but they don't want to employ any Arabs, they cast an Indian. And let's be honest, the average American viewer is so dumb and racist that they probably don't even know the difference. I mean, according to some people on Reddit, they all look the same anyway. But there's another reason to believe that this is a deliberate case of discrimination. And this is the point in the video where I pull the classic YouTuber move of revealing that I've been hiding something from you the entire time. You see, the One Piece live-action series is produced by Tomorrow Studios, a partnership between ITV Studios and producer Marty Adelstein. The ITV Studios' only base of operations in the Middle East is in Israel, and Marty Adelstein, CEO of Tomorrow Studios, is on the advisory board of the Creative Community for Peace, CCFP, an organization dedicated to spreading Israeli interests through the entertainment industry. In July of this year, Bassam Ouda, a Palestinian journalist and filmmaker, was nominated for an Emmy for her work covering the ongoing genocide in Palestine. The CCFP wrote a letter petitioning the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences to rescind the nomination and remove her from the program. Their campaign accused her of being a communist and a terrorist. Again, this is an award-winning and award-nominated journalist whose only crime is documenting what her people are going through. That letter was signed personally by both Marty Adelstein and former president of ITV Studios America, Orly Adelson. It isn't just that the film and TV industries have a history of discriminating against Arabs, and specifically doing so by hiring Indians to play Arab roles. It's that the people actually making the One Piece live action have a history of bigotry against Arabs. So I can't say with 100% certainty that this was a deliberate act of discrimination, but what I can say is that if it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, and it hates Arabs like a duck, it's probably just a racist-ass duck. Also, the irony of a manga about anti-discrimination and decolonialism getting adapted into live action by a bunch of Zionists is not lost on me.